Hi everyone, and welcome to the tutorial video for your budget spreadsheet. So to give you a brief overview of the spreadsheet, there are four main tabs that you need to look at. So the first one is categories, the second one is inputs, and then we have the dashboard tabs, both monthly and annual. So in order to get to a filled in spreadsheet, let's start at the beginning. When you make your purchase, you'll receive a PDF that looks something like this. And by clicking this link here to access your spreadsheet, you'll be directed to this page. Essentially here, you can make a copy of the document so you can have your own personal version to fill in with your own details. So here's a blank version that I've just opened up, and let's get started on filling it in. So on the Setup tab is where you can add your own income and expense categories. And these categories are going to be used in the following dashboard tabs to summarize your expenses. So within the tab, you can add up to 20 different categories for both your income and your expenses. So maybe if we start with the expenses, I think to get the most out of this tracker, I'd really recommend to take some time here to go through all of your bank statements and all of your individual expenses and income streams and group them together into a set of categories that make sense for you. So it's important to group things together so it's easier to track within the dashboard and within your own head. For example, I could have separate categories for Netflix, for Prime, for Apple TV, and for Disney. However, these are all very similar types of expenses, and given their monthly subscriptions, they're not going to change too much month on month. So maybe here it would be better to group them together into a single category called subscriptions. So if I was to repeat that process and go through all of my expenses and think about, what are the groups that make sense to me, I could end up with a list that looks something like this. So I've got everything from my mortgage to my weekly food shop, all the way down to clothes and shopping. So this could look very different depending on what your groups of expenses are. But for me, this is what makes sense. Now, if I move over to income, there are a few things that I'd like to add here. So I've got my salary, I've got my commission, and I've got my side hustle. So it doesn't matter how frequently you're paid. So if it's every month or every 2 weeks, or if your commission comes in on a random day in a month, it doesn't really matter because this spreadsheet can track irrespective of when those things are coming in, and you can get those insights both monthly and annual within the dashboard tabs. So let's move over to the inputs tab where we can start filling in our details. So our next tab that we have is the input tab. And this is where you'll record your actual lines of income and expenses. Now, for each line of income or expense that we record, there's a fixed amount of information that you'll need to input. So just to take you through that process, if we were to put our first expense that we had here in January of 2023, that was for my bank, which was Bank ABC, and the amount was for 950. Then I can select the category that I want to allocate this expense to, which would be my mortgage. And just as a reminder, these are the categories that we would have inputted on our previous tab, and these will update automatically in these part of these cells and the rest of the dashboard as well. So let's select that for the mortgage. And essentially that is the whole process of how you update this dashboard and keep it updated going forward. You need to just repeat that process of finding out what your expenses are and inputting them line by line into the dashboard. Now, I'll just take a second here to say that there's one of two ways that you could do this. If your bank provides an Excel export of all of your transactions, then you can copy and paste in all of the values for a particular month that you might be filling in. One tip, if you are doing this, is to make sure that you paste any values that you're copying as values. So what I mean by that is if I imagine I've gone to my separate Excel that I've got from my bank and I want to paste that into my tracker, then I will go to the edit and I will go to paste specials and I will click values only. Now that basically ensures that none of the formatting gets disrupted and your spreadsheet looks the same as it does when you first got it. So if I do that again for the amount, then again I go to edit, I go to paste special and I go values only. So that's if you have an Excel export from your bank. What I then do is just go through and tag up all of this spend into the different categories that I want it to be in. I would update the time period so that everything's related to January. And that would be the process of how I would do it with an Excel export. If I don't have an Excel export, then what I would do is simply just go through this line by line and add in my expenses as required, and then do the same for my income as well. Now, after doing that process, your spreadsheet will look something like this, where you've got all of your lines of income mapped out for the whole year or whatever period of months that you're looking at, and all of your expenses as well on the right-hand side. So now we've got all of our information inputted, we can have a look at some of the insights that we can get from both the monthly and the annual dashboards. So once we've defined all of our categories on the categories tab and we've added all of our income and expenses on the inputs tab, our work here is basically done. And now we can just use the monthly and annual dashboards to understand our income, our expenses, and our savings. So the only inputs that you'll need to use on this part of the dashboard is inputting what month you want to look at or what year you want to look at on the annual dashboard. So if I was to select August, then the dashboard will automatically update to pull in my expenses and my income from August. So for the sake of this demo, let's look at September, for example. And this dashboard is split into three main sections. So we've got the income, the expenses, and then our savings on the right-hand side. So if we were to look at our income for that month of September, we made 3,808, which is up 17% from last month. Looking at the pie chart, I can see that's about 14% of my income was from my commission and the rest of it was from my salary. And so that commission is probably the reason that we had that increase in income in September, which is great. Now moving over to expenses, I can see that I spent around 2,182, which is pretty much the same as it was last month, only up by 3%. And looking at the sort of breakdown in terms of what I actually spent on, the large majority of that was on my mortgage. Then clothes and shopping was another really big one in September, as well as restaurants and social. Whereas my coffee and subscription was much smaller, so there was less spending in those areas. So looking at my expenses now, I spent 2,182 in the month of September, which is up 3% from last month, but it's essentially pretty much flat compared to what I spent in August. Looking at the different categories that I've spent on, I can see that my mortgage is by far and away my biggest expense. And then I've got some other lines coming in here about clothes and shopping and restaurants, which were also pretty significant expenses within the month of September. And I can also see the exact amounts that were spent down here, as well as the change versus last month for each one of those categories, which is great to keep a track on whether you're spending more or less in a particular area relative to last month. Now the final tab here, the final section, of the dashboard is for savings. So essentially what this looks at is our income minus our expenses. So how much did we have left over in the month of September? And we can see that we had 1,626, which is up 43% from last month, which is great because it means I saved a lot more than I did last month. Probably because I got paid my commission as well, so I had a little bit extra money lying around. So this is a waterfall chart that basically breaks down what that spending looks like. So I had two sources of income of my salary and my commission, and then these are the different expenses that came out along the way. So it's just a really quick and easy way of visualizing where my money's going so I can keep on top of it. Then I've also got some really useful stats down here around my spending rate. So what percentage of my income did I actually spend on expenses and what percent did I save? So in the month of September, I spent 57% and saved 43%. Then at the bottom, the final bit of insight I can take from the monthly tab is just an interesting thought that if I was to save this amount of money, so 1,626, for the rest of the year, i.e. from September onwards, by the end of the year, I'd have £6,504, which is really great motivation to say, okay, for next month, I'm going to try and keep my expenses about the same so I can save that same amount. And in the end of the year, I'll have all of this money to put into my savings, my investments, or spend on something nice. So that's the monthly dashboard tab. So moving on to the annual dashboard tab, this is a really helpful one when you want to take a step back and think about how are you doing financially over the course of the year. So again, the only part of this tab that you'll need to edit is putting in whatever year you want to look at. And as long as you have data from the inputs tab for that particular time period, then you'll be able to get all sorts of insights. So if I show you some of those insights, if we start with the income, I can see that based on my information, I've made 41,000 in the year of 2023. You can see how that looks over the course of the 12 months. I can look at my highest income month, my lowest income month, and my average monthly, which is about just under 3,500. Can also see all of my different expenses that I've incurred over the course of 2023. I can see that July was definitely my biggest spending month, and that's because of this turquoise area, which is for my holidays. I can also see that I've spent the most on my mortgage over the course of the period, about 11,500, with an average monthly of 950. And I can also see that on average each month I'm spending about 2.2 to 2.3 thousand. Which is a really interesting insight. And I can also set some targets for 2024 if I want to keep a track of this and think about what do I want to be setting. Then finally, if I move down to the savings tab, we can get some interesting insights on what's coming in versus what's going out. So I can see in 2023 that over the course of the year, I saved 14,400, which meant that my spending rate, i.e. how much of my income am I actually spending, was about 65%, which of course means that I'm saving about 35% of my income. I can see that over the course of the period, I'm averaging about 2,200 in expenses and saving 1,200 each month, which is on target and great for me. I can also see that some interesting scenarios here. So if I was to reduce my expenses by 10%, maybe cutting back on restaurants or whatever it may be, then by the end of the year, I'd have 2,694 more than I would have done with my previous expenses. So that's just an interesting thought process of, if I was to cut down by 10%, which is not a huge amount, it actually can add up to quite a fair bit of money. Then finally is the emergency fund calculator. So essentially what this does is it looks at your total savings that you've amassed over whatever period. It also then looks at your average monthly expenses, and it calculates how many months you'd be able to survive using your savings at your current rate of spending. So I can see here that with my 14,000 and my expenses of about 2,200, I would survive for about 6.5 months on my current pot of money, which is a really interesting insight and definitely something that I want to build going forward. So this tracker is really helpful to keep on top of that and make sure that I'm achieving my financial goals. And that's it. So hopefully that was helpful and you're well prepared to get started on tracking your expenses today. I just wanted to finish on a couple of points. You may have noticed that as we've been going through, there's no currency for each of these amounts. So as long as you input all of your income and expenses in the same currency, the dashboard will update automatically, but you won't see, so it doesn't matter whether it's in dollars, pounds or yen. The dashboard is agnostic of currency. The other point is that, as we mentioned, the categories and inputs tab is for you to edit and add all your information, but then the dashboard tabs are all pretty much automated. All you need to do is select the month that you want to analyze and the year that you want to look at. And because there's lots of formulas going on in the bottom parts of the cell, if you were to add anything in this section, then you'll get this warning pop up saying that you're trying to edit part of the sheet that shouldn't be changed. So just click cancel and that will get rid of any changes that you may have made that could disrupt any of the calculations. But always remember that you've got your PDF, so you can just make a copy and you know that copy always works, so you can always refer back to that version if anything goes wrong. And if you do have any other questions, then please do reach out to me. My details are in the description. And if you'd like to also purchase the tracker, then there's a link there as well. And if you've already purchased it, then thank you again for supporting my store. And yeah, hope you have a great day. Thanks, guys.